Right, so there I was, poking around this old barn like a right pillock. Cobwebs everywhere, the smell of musty hay, you know the sort. It was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, untouched for decades. The air was thick with dust and every step I took stirred up a cloud of memories. And then I saw her, buried under some junk, covered in dust and grime, a 1960s JAWA 250. It was like a ghost from the past waiting to be rediscovered. The sight of it made my heart skip a beat. The red paint was faded, the chrome was rusty, but I could see the potential. It was like finding a forgotten treasure. The kind of treasure that tells a story, one that's been waiting patiently for someone to listen. Now, some of you might think I'm daft getting excited over a pile of old metal, but this wasn't just any bike, this was a JAWA, a piece of history, a symbol of a bygone era. It was more than just a machine, it was a piece of art, a Czech classic, a thing of beauty, or at least it used to be. And it brought back a flood of memories, mostly involving my grandfather and a very embarrassing incident with a chicken. Those were the days when life was simpler, and every ride felt like an adventure. But we'll get to that later. The point is, this bike was more than just a rusty relic. It was a time machine, a link to the past, and I was bloody well going to get it running again. I could already imagine the wind in my hair and the roar of the engine, even if it killed me. Well, no, not really. But it might as well have, considering the state it was in. The engine was seized, the tires were flat, and the wiring was a mess. It was going to take a lot of work. Still, a challenge is a challenge, and I do love proving those doubters wrong. So I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed my toolbox, and prepared for battle. This was more than just a restoration project, it was a mission. This was going to be epic, a journey of sweat, grease, and a whole lot of determination. And I was ready for it. See, this JAWA wasn't just some random find. It was practically family. It had been a part of our lives for as long as I could remember, a silent witness to countless family gatherings and stories. My grandfather, a man who enjoyed a pint or two and a good yarn, used to ride one just like it. He was a storyteller, and the JAWA was often the star of his tales. He'd tell me stories of riding through the countryside, wind in his hair, not a care in the world. Those rides were his escape, his moments of pure freedom. He'd let me sit on the tank when I was a lad, pretending to steer. I felt like I was on top of the world even though my feet barely touched the ground. I was probably a right pain, asking him a million questions a minute. How fast does it go, Granddad? Can I ride it when I'm older? But he never complained. He loved that bike, and he loved sharing that passion with me. It was our special bond, something that connected us across generations. So, yeah, seeing this JAWA brought back a lot of memories. Good ones. It was like a time machine taking me back to those simpler days. And it made me realize I wanted to experience that same freedom, that same joyride through the past. I wanted to feel the wind in my hair just like Granddad did. I owed it to myself and to Granddad to get this thing back on the road, to relive those memories and create new ones, honoring the legacy of a man who taught me the true meaning of freedom. Now, I'm not going to lie, the restoration was a right pain in the backside. It was one of those projects that seemed to fight me every step of the way. The engine was seized solid, it felt like it hadn't turned over in decades, and every bolt was rusted in place. The wiring looked like it had been chewed by rats. It was a tangled mess of frayed and broken wires, a real nightmare to sort out. And don't even get me started on the brakes. They were so worn out, it was a wonder they ever worked at all. Let's just say they wouldn't stop a runaway pram, let alone a motorcycle. The brake pads were practically non-existent, but I'm not one to back down from a challenge. I knew this bike had potential and I was determined to bring it back to life. I started by stripping the bike down to its bare bones. Every part was removed, cataloged, and set aside for inspection. Each piece was carefully cleaned, inspected, and if necessary, cursed at. Some parts were in better shape than others, but all needed attention. Some parts I could salvage. Others, well, let's just say I got very familiar with the local parts supplier. I spent countless hours searching for the right pieces. There were moments, I'll admit, when I questioned my sanity. The sheer amount of work was overwhelming at times. Covered in grease, surrounded by bits of metal, the air blew with my language. It was a tough, dirty job, but I kept pushing forward. But then I'd remember Granddad and that look on his face when he talked about his JAWA. And I'd crack on. His passion and stories kept me motivated, reminding me why I started this journey in the first place. Now, I'm not exactly known for my patience. So you can imagine my frustration when, after weeks of painstaking work, the bloody thing still wouldn't start. I checked the spark plugs, the fuel lines, the carburetor. I even resorted to reading the manual, which, for a bloke like me, is a fate worse than death. Turns out it was the carburetor, a tiny little thing, causing a whole lot of trouble. But I got there in the end, cleaned it out, put it back together, and prayed to the gods of internal combustion. And then, a miracle happened.